Hello everybody. Welcome to Getting Started with Drum Experience, a short tutorial in which we'll look at how to put together a small setup with a kick drum, a snare drum, and a hi-hat. We're also going to look at some other cool stuff we can do, like route room mics to their own bus and set up a master bus. But enough about that. That's all for later. Now, we're going to dive right in and load the first drum. In the middle of the screen, we have 10 drum slots. It's into them we'll load our drums. The first drum we're going to load is a kick drum. We want to load it into the top left slot, and so we click on that slot's Load button. This window that just opened is the Load Drum window. Just as with all windows in Drum Experience, you can move it around by clicking and dragging in the top bar. As you can see, we have a lot of drums to choose from here. In this menu, we see all the drum kits that are installed on this computer. In this case, 3 drum kits are found: MMD, Maple Studio, and Glam Rock. Below them is a special category, Custom, which gives the opportunity to load your own custom samples into Drum Experience. But that's all for another tutorial. In this menu, we can select what type of drum to display. We're looking for a kick drum. Let's select All for Drum Kit and Kick for Type. This way we get to see all the kick drums from all the drum kits. Now it's just a question of what kind of kick drum we want. As you can see, we have 4 to choose from. To hear what they sound like, we can simply click on them. I'll go ahead and choose the MMD kick. When a drum is selected, a big glowing frame appears around it. Before we click Load to finish loading the drum, we'll look at one more thing: the microphones. The listed microphones are the actual microphones used to record this drum. If we count, we see that this kick drum has been recorded with 10 microphones. We can listen to the different characteristics of the microphones by first clicking the Deselect All button to deactivate all the mics, and then activate the front microphone. Wow, that's a lot of bass. Let's turn that mic off and hear the room microphone. This is a big room. In fact, the whole MMD kit is recorded in a castle, so it has plenty of natural reverberation. We can listen to it through 2 tom microphones and the beater mic, for example. Quite a different sound. We will simply select them all and are now ready to load the drum by clicking the Load button. Here we get asked the question if we want to set default volume and pan for the loaded drum. This is when we first meet the buses, which are located at the bottom of the screen. They're a fundamental part of Drum Experience. Let's spend a few moments going through how the buses work. When we're finished with this tutorial, we will have seen most of their important features demonstrated. The main functionality of the buses can be described with the following 5 easy points. Buses act as receivers from different sources. Buses can be set to receive from any microphone of any drum. A single drum can be received by more than one bus. Buses can be set to receive the audio content of other buses. And buses can have insert effects. It's important to understand that drums are never loaded on a bus, but a drum is always loaded and ready to be received by all the buses. To play a drum through a particular bus, we need to raise the volumes of that drum's microphones on that bus. The microphones we're not interested in hearing on that bus are simply turned off. But now, let's go back to where we were. We've been given the opportunity to set the default volume and pan on a bus for this drum, which we have just loaded. This does not mean we're loading the drum onto any bus, but, as I just explained, it is already loaded and ready for all buses. This is just a convenient way to set the volume and pan to a good starting point. We can choose No here, and then the drum will not be heard at all because all microphones are turned off on all buses. But I like to get a head start, and therefore I click Yes. And now, as bus number 1 was selected, our drum will be heard through that bus. It's an extremely flexible system, which is not hard to learn once you've seen it a few times. Now we can click this slot to hear the drum, and we also see how the VU meter for bus number 1 animates. We also hear that the hits are soft if I click in the bottom of the drum slot, and hard if I click near the top. Here in the top left corner, we see the velocity value of every hit being displayed. The soft hits have a low value, and the hard hits have a high value. To name the bus, we click the T button, and then click on Unnamed to type in a new name. In our case, I'll christen the bus Kick. We're now about to open the most important and most powerful window in the entire program, Bus Inputs. This window is opened by clicking the Bus Inputs button, which is the largest of the buttons on the bus. This is quite a large window offering a world of possibilities. The header up here reads Kick 22 MMD. Yes, that's the drum we just loaded. If I click the kick drum, we see that all microphones are enabled and sounding, and all the VU meters give a reading. I could, for example, click solo on the Tom 14 microphone, raise the volume a bit, and hear the drum played only out of that microphone. It's worth noting that the volumes we see here are the default values that we got when we loaded the drum. This window, the Bus Inputs, is where you can really create your own drum sounds, configurations, and setups, which puts every other drum sampler to shame. But we're not going to fiddle around anymore with these settings for the time being. We deactivate solo and close the window. Now the time has come to load a second drum, our snare drum. Let's load it into this drum slot by clicking the Load button. Again, we see the Load Drum window. This time we select snare as the drum type. As we can see, these drums have more than one articulation, as compared to the kick drum we just loaded, which only had one. For those of you who don't know what articulations are, shortly put, they are different ways of playing a drum. Click the articulations in the list to hear what they sound like. The obvious choice of snare drum would have been to pick one from the same drum kit as our kick drum. In this case, the MMD kit. Then they would have the same natural acoustic room sound. But to demonstrate some important features of drum experience, I select a very dry snare from the Maple Studio kit instead. This is a nice sounding drum indeed, but to make it fit in with the kick drum, we need to do a little bit of work. Let's click the Load button and then set the default settings for this drum on bus number 2. When we click the drum slots now, we see that the kick is played through bus number 1 and the snare through bus number 2. We have now come to the point of adding our first audio insert effect onto a bus. What we want to do is add a reverb effect to bus number 2 to give the sound of a larger room to our snare. To add an effect in Drum Experience, click the arrow next to one of the empty boxes in the top region of the bus. These are the effect slots. In the menu which pops up, we can choose among the built-in insert effects. We select Reverb from the list. Here is the Bonafide reverb integrated into Drum Experience. It opens in a window, which means we can move it around just like all windows. Let's see what happens when I tweak the parameters a little. This sounds good to me. By right-clicking the effect slot, we can enable and disable the effect and listen to the difference between the snare drum with and without the reverb. Let's click the Bus Inputs section on bus number 2. Here we see how all the kick drum's microphones are turned off on this bus, and the snare drum has the default settings loaded. Good, everything's in order. Before we move on to loading the next drum, we give the bus a name. Snare shall be thy name.